One of the key ideas that is running through Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy is this notion that some goods that we tend to be motivated by aren't really going to make us happy, at least not the way that we think about them, not the way that we pursue them, not the way that we talk about them in much of human society. And he's going to talk about these in terms of goods of fortune. And as he's done with philosophy herself, he has personified fortune as a woman, or really, who's done the personification. It's philosophy. She said, if fortune could appear to you here, this is what she would say to you. And why does that happen? What's the point of this in the plot? So the question is whether these goods really are going to be sufficient, whether they're going to be fully good in the way that we take them to be, whether they're going to be the kinds of things that can truly make us happy. And she notices that, before we go into the analysis of these goods, Boethius has had it pretty good so far. He didn't complain about fortune the way most people don't when things are actually going quite well. Then everything is, hey, the universe is fine, I'm happy with this place, I'm getting wealth, I'm getting power, I'm getting fame, people like me, I have pleasures, I enjoy associations and friendships. So like I put here, we're all right when fortune favors us, when things are actually going our way. When do we start complaining? When fortune turns against us. And fortune says something really interesting to Boethius. She says, why are you complaining? Did you actually do anything to deserve those gifts that I've given you so far of fame? No, you kind of walked into it, didn't you, buddy? Because you were born in the right kind of family. So, sure, you may have studied Greek and you might be an able administrator, but they wouldn't have just asked Joe Blow out there on the street to come in and run the show. They picked somebody who actually came from a patrician family. You were in the right place at the right time. You got nothing to complain about. I give and I take away. And when I'm giving, you ought to know that I'm not giving those things for keeps. Because that's the way fortune is. It's like a wheel that turns round and round. Sometimes you're on the top part, and sooner or later, if you're on the top part, that wheel's going to turn and you're going to be on the bottom part. So you better get ready for that. So fortune is saying this to him. And why is this such a hard lesson for us? Why is this hard for us to hear? Well, because we do want those things that fortune gives us. Wealth, power, some control over our lives, people liking us, pleasure, fame. Maybe not, huge fame, but we'd like the people in our workplace to know who we are. We'd like the people in our town to actually know who we are and to think good things of us. But that's not really up to us. Some of it is. We can certainly turn our attention to that. We can say, I'm going to try to make as much wealth as possible. So for example, if you want to do that, work a couple jobs. Don't just work your full-time job. Start delivering pizzas on the side. You want to get out of debt? That's one way to do it. You want people to like you? Act like a likable person. Do things that people like to look at and enjoy having around. Maybe you want people to invite you to parties? Learn to play guitar or something like that. Doesn't mean they'll necessarily invite you, though. And it doesn't mean that somebody couldn't say bad things about you behind your back. And it doesn't mean that if you do make that money that you won't lose it in a get-rich-quick scheme or just because of inflation. Why is this so hard for us? We come back to that question. Well, what we really want in fortune's goods is not just those goods themselves. Self-sufficiency. We want to be independent. We want to be secure. We want to be able to take care of ourselves. So some people will heap up a lot of wealth because they figure, whatever happens, I'll be able to buy something with it. That's why, here in America, we tend to put money into bank accounts or we buy stocks or stuff like that. In other cultures, they buy lots of jewelry and gold. They carry their wealth around with them because they know that you can at least sell this. If the economy collapses, then you can still sell that bracelet to somebody and you can buy some food. You can buy some clothing. You might be able to, if you need to get out of the country, you can buy a passport and buy passage or something like that. People want wealth. People want power. People want connections. People want offices. People want all these sorts of things because they think that they're actually going to make them self-sufficient. Self-sufficient for what? To fulfill our desires, to actually be happy. So what we're going to do now is look at what philosophy has to teach us about each one of these goods of fortune. We're going to start with wealth. And these reflections are coming mostly in Book 2, Chapter 5, but you see other ones sporadically coming up from time to time, including in Book 3. Let's think about wealth. Let's think about money in particular. Why is money valuable? What good is it? It's valuable because you can exchange it for other things. It's what we call an instrumental good. It's not good intrinsically. If you actually, pile up a whole bunch of dollar bills and you think that that by itself is going to make you happy, unless you really have a weird, understanding of what's going to make you happy. Let's say perhaps you enjoy smelling the money, or like, some of those cartoons, you take baths in it or something like that. If that really turns you on, then I suppose you could have some measure of happiness. But for the rest of us, no, money is only good if you can actually use it for something, if you can spend it, if you can exchange it for the things that you really want to have. And, we might say, well, I don't just mean wealth in the sense of money, I mean property, I mean having nice clothes. I like this jacket. I've had this now for a number of years. Probably keep it until it wears out. Good tie. My wife bought me this a little while ago. It's really nice. I wear it quite often. Are these things going to make me happy? I suppose, if I'm out there and I'm cold, it's nice to have a corduroy jacket as opposed to a thin jacket. But it's not going to do that much for me, is it? He has a few other things that he notes too. Wealth is one of those sorts of goods that, because it's measured, it can only be shared by diminishing it. So if I decide that I want to improve your situation, I have to give you some money and now I have less of it. It's not like wisdom or knowledge, where if I share my wisdom or knowledge with you, I'm not losing it in the process. It's not like, if I talk about this on the video, that somehow the video is sucking out my intelligence or sucking out my knowledge, which I myself, didn't produce. I got it from Boethius. The book didn't lose anything by my reading it and absorbing Boethius's wisdom that he laid down, and so you're able to partake in it. Money isn't like that, though. As a matter of fact, most of our possessions aren't like that. I give you this piece of chalk, and you decide you want to use it to write, you give it back to me, and now it's a shorter piece of chalk. I've got less chalk, right? That's one of the basic facts about money and about many tangible properties. If I give you my coffee and you drink, 5 gulps of it, I've got less coffee. So when we share these things among many people, they get diminished. And so if that's really going to be a satisfying good, that's a weird way for that good to be. It gets more interesting, more paradoxical. And this is stuff that we often don't think about until we're well into that situation. What happens when we actually do have plenty of money? Does it really make us happy? Does it really make us feel secure? It might for a while. And when we don't have it, we imagine, man, if I just won the lottery and I had $1 million, not like those other people have $1 million, I would put it in the bank and I'd be secure and just go after investments that I knew weren't going to lose any money, and I would be established for the rest of my life. I wouldn't have to work, jobs where I'm afraid of losing my job or where I'm not getting paid well enough. I would be independent. Is that really the case? Let's think about this. Boethius says, the more wealth and possessions that you have, the more vulnerable you are. The more you need in order to protect or keep them. So you get a nice house. What do you need to do? Well, first, if you want to hold on to that house, you've got to pay taxes, property taxes, in the place where you got it. So that's something right there. Actually, property taxes in some places are so high that you can't actually afford to keep that house for some people. But let's go on. You probably need a home security system, don't you? So that you can make sure that if somebody comes in, they don't steal all your things. You need to pay insurance so that even if somebody does come in and steal your things, they can be replaced. Or if a natural disaster happens. Notice, it's not enough to have the thing itself, to have the property, the possession, the wealth. Then you have to do something to keep yourself from losing it. And it's a weird kind of self-sufficiency. It's a weird kind of independence where you're actually so dependent on other things to make sure that you stay in that condition of independence or self-sufficiency. It's really not what it pretends to be. So he has a few other reflections as well. He says, wealth can cause harm to its owner. Can cause harm in a number of different ways. The example that he has is if you're wealthy and you walk around and people know that you're wealthy, they might kill you for it. They might rob you. They might beat you up. Even if they just think that you have it, they might do that. And the same thing can go for clothing, for cars, for television sets, for laptops. Pick whatever you like. If you've got something that's valuable and you think that it's actually going to make you secure, you really want to think that out. Is it truly making you secure, or is it drawing the attention of other people who might be dangerous to you? Finally, he says it makes us dependent on external help. It really creates new needs. So wealth is a really strange thing when we get down to it. When we look at the real existence, the real nature of wealth, it doesn't turn out to be what we first imagined it to be. And this is what philosophy does. It looks at things and thinks out, well, what is it really like? How does it really work? Wealth is supposed to satisfy our needs, and yet what we find is when we acquire it, it actually creates more needs, even to the extent where greed itself can become an expression of a need that can never be satisfied. The greedy person can't ever be self-sufficient, can't ever be satisfied, can't ever be happy, because he or she always wants more and more and more and more, and no matter how much they have, it's never enough. Let's consider another good of fortune that Boethius discusses and which philosophy reveals to really be insufficient. Power and position. So he uses the word offices. What we mean here is people being given power over other people, positions of authority. This could be anything ranging from being the head of a household to being the group who's in charge of some sort of activity as a committee, to being the leader of a particular clique, to being the president of the United States, being given supreme power over life and death in many respects, and everything in between. Now, willpower, which is something that people actually do seek, and sometimes sacrifice wealth, sacrifice pleasure, sacrifice all sorts of other things in order to have, will this really satisfy us? Can that really provide us with self-sufficiency? Does it make us secure? Boethius says no, it doesn't. Because if we think about power, there's a number of things that are not necessarily wrong with it. They're just things that we often forget about. They're goods of fortune, and fortune can turn on us. None of the goods of fortune are actually going to make us truly happy. So, for example, when bad people get power and position, it becomes really clear to us, he says, that power isn't necessarily a good. Because if it was, then bad people wouldn't be able to do such bad things with it. All you need to do is work in a service industry, or whether it be restaurants or customer service or anything like that, where you have to deal with somebody and they have some power over you for a moment, where you're going to see that some people are in fact bad, and when they come to you, they're mean, they're aggressive, they blame you for all sorts of things. Sometimes they want to exercise power over you just so they can dominate. And that sort of thing shows us power is not by itself a good. Those people may think it's a good because they enjoy, hurting others or dominating them, but it's not really good to the outside observer. And what makes power good? It's dependent on actually having good people in office. Boethius thinks that the way that fortune works out is most of the time we don't actually have good people. We have, at best, mediocre, and a lot of times complete, charlatans, fools, manipulators, deceivers, wicked people who have power and authority. And that shows us that this is not something that is really going to make us happy, because it doesn't make them happy and it doesn't make anybody else happy. So that should be enough by itself, but he gives us a number of other considerations as well. One of these is worth thinking about. If we want to have power over other people, how do we actually exercise power? Power works by providing rewards and punishments. And for the most part, those rewards and punishments, particularly when we get down to the punishments, have to do with our bodies and with possessions. As Boethius is going to say in here, you can't really coerce a free mind. You can tell a free person, look, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to throw you in prison. I'm going to kill you. Don't say the sorts of things that I don't want you to talk about, or else I'll threaten you and I'll hurt you, maybe hurt your family. But if that person says, you can do what you want, you can't imprison my mind, there's really nothing you can do. You can torture them, you can do horrific things to them, but you cannot actually coerce them in what's most them. This is Boethius' view on this. Remember, he's a guy who's in prison at the time that he's writing this, under threat of death. So, is power really powerful? Power can't make people love you. It can act as an aphrodisiac. It can make people want to sleep with you, but it can't make people respect you in any fundamental sense. It can't make people love you. It can't make people admire you for good qualities that you don't have. It really can't do an awful lot, can it? And that's kind of funny, because power means the ability to do something. So if power itself is kind of impotent, we have a paradox here. Going on a little bit further, power, when it's possessed, doesn't actually make a person a master over their own desires, over their own selves. So, interestingly, once you give a person power, you may in fact reveal the fact that they don't really have power. If they have an addiction, for an example, if they have vulnerabilities to certain temptations, if they haven't developed self-will, a capacity to master one's own desires and to persevere, to follow through on things, then giving them power could actually be bad for them. They may desire it because some people actually desire power because they think, well, then I can get away with anything that I want to. But is that really a good thing? Not for them as who they are as a human person. It can lead to a lack of development. If here's just an example, and I'm not going to talk about a moral example, but let's say you get some government position and you have a driver to take you around everywhere. You don't have to drive. Are you losing out on anything in that process? You may start to take for granted the ability to get from point A to point B at any given time, and you're dependent on the person who you have doing that office for you. Put back on your own resources. If you need to drive around town and you're not used to actually driving, you're going to have a hard time, especially if you're driving in the kinds of places that people who have drivers typically tend to drive in. So it doesn't make you a master over your own self. It actually allows a sort of impotence. It also doesn't give a person virtue or root out vices that they have. This is another way of saying the same thing. A virtue is a capacity to do good things. A vice is a sort of incapacity that makes you do bad things. So power is not going to make you courageous. Power is not going to make you wise. Power is not going to make you a just person or a temperate person. As a matter of fact, if you have any vices, power will probably bring those to light, because with some of the normal restrictions that a person without power goes by, you might actually start doing the sorts of things that show people that you're greedy or selfish or stingy or vain, or we can go down the whole list like that. Another thing that he doesn't really talk about, but we ought to consider, is if you actually realize that you have these faults about yourself and you have power, will it be easier or harder for you to treat these faults? That's worth mentioning. The last thing that we want to bring up is that power doesn't really grant security. And he gives you a lot of examples of this. He says it actually causes fear in those who have it, because now that you have power, you have to figure out how you're going to hold on to it. Especially if you start doing bad things to other people that they might want to take some revenge upon, or if you start scaring other people and they want to be secure themselves, they may want to get power just so that they can exercise power over you and make sure you can't hurt them. You introduce yourself into a dynamic when you seek power for its own sake. You introduce yourself into a dynamic which can't really be satisfied. Power can't really provide us with self-sufficiency. It can't really make us independent. As a matter of fact, it ties us even more into the matrix of other people's desires and fears and makes us subject to them. So strangely enough, power and position don't really, although they are good things, don't really end up making us as happy as we'd like to be. Another main good of fortune is what we can call fame or glory, reputation, or in our day, I think perhaps one of the best terms for this would actually be celebrity. That in some ways captures exactly what Boethius is interested in examining here. Can these things make us happy? A lot of people say, I just want my 15 minutes of fame and then my life will be complete. I just want to have something that I'm known for, that makes me unique, that lets me be somebody. This is a very common desire. It's one that I think many of us can relate to. Some other people, of course, want nobody to know who they are, and this isn't really a problem for them. So here's one of the first things that he says about fame. He spends a lot of time talking about this. Fame or reputation is very relative. We don't realize this at first. As a matter of fact, a lot of us can get sucked into this pretty easily because we end up being the proverbial big fish in a small pond. And what that does is that produces a desire within us to have that situation occur. So this happens a lot with kids in school. You're at the top of your class in your elementary school, your middle school, your high school, and now you think that you're big stuff, right? And now you go off to college and you find out that the college that you've gone to is full of kids who are some of the smartest kids in their school, and you're really not anybody special anymore. Or the same thing can happen with athletics. You move up from the lower leagues to the higher leagues, and now, you're not so special anymore. Really, if we want to put this, put a name to this, this is about being special. This is about being somebody who is set apart. And how special are you? It really depends on context, doesn't it? It's very relative. So he has examples of people who are famous in their country, but they go somewhere else, and everybody's like, who's that guy? Great example of this is being what we call YouTube famous, right? There are people who have, hundreds of thousands of subscribers on YouTube, and now you even see them doing advertisements on TV, and you're like, who is that person? I've never heard of them. And a lot of times they're like doing makeup tutorials, or they're comedians, or, you know, they talk about this or that. It's not a lot of philosophy people who are YouTube famous. Usually those people are famous before they come to YouTube. YouTube fame for academic people, you got 10,000 subscribers, now you're kind of famous. But it's all very relative, right? YouTube famous at one level isn't the same thing as YouTube famous at another level, which is not the same thing as being famous in the same way that a actor who you know is in top budget movies is famous. These are all very relative to each other. People ask me who my great heroes are, and when I name them, nobody actually knows who most of them are, because they are famous people, but they're not famous people that the general public has heard of. I think because of the movie 300, some people know something about, you know, the name Brisidas, the Spartan leader, the Spartan general, but he was actually from the Peloponnesian War. He's a guy who I actually like quite a bit. They put statues up to him in Greece. They called him the Liberator, because he liberated people from the democratic empire of the Athenians, who were acting, you know, very undemocratically. But unless you're actually like a classic scholar or somebody who reads a lot of military history, you probably don't have any idea who that guy is. And yet in the ancient period, anybody who was educated knew who he was and had feelings one way or another about him. And we can say the same about lots and lots of people. So it's very context dependent, you know. And somebody asks me who I look up to, you know, in philosophy today, I can name some people, but you probably don't know them, even though their books are available, and you can, you know, see them on YouTube, some of them, because we don't move from one context to the other context to the other context. Same thing goes, by the way, for people in politics. You know, who's your actual House of Representatives representative in your district? You may not know. Right? Because a lot of times they're what we call backbenchers. They may have a lot of authority, and they're famous in those circles. They may have articles written about them, but a lot of people don't know who they are. Who's on the cabinet currently for the presidency of the United States? Who's the Secretary of Education? Who's the Secretary of the Treasury? These are famous people, but they may not be famous to everybody else. It's very relative. And when we go from country to country, from subculture to subculture, we realize just how contingent fame actually is. As a matter of fact, that's one nice thing about celebrity or fame, is that if you shift things just right, you can actually get away from it. Time is also a factor. Time and, as Boethius says, eternity. How much fame does anybody have in the scope of eternity? Not a hell of a lot. So if you're thinking in terms of what lasts forever, or what truly exists, then fame is not actually going to measure up as a good. It's not going to be sufficient. But even think about just time and how it goes on. How many of you knew who Boethius was? Like I said in one of the other videos, one of the most commonly copied writers of the Middle Ages. So if you were an intelligent person in the Middle Ages, of course you would know who Boethius was. In Western Europe, of course. If we went to the East, maybe not so much. But how many of us knew who he was before we encountered him in a philosophy class? I know I sure didn't. I learned about him by taking philosophy. Because if they had him in my history textbook, I didn't pay attention. So time is a really important factor. How long will you hold on to the fame that you have? Think about celebrity. Think about musical groups. Think about the fact that retro these days can be what happened 10, 15 years ago. So that you have, older people like myself saying, wait a second, that's not retro, when the younger generation is saying, yeah, this is what we understand to be retro. These things are fleeting. Things go through revivals. Why do they do that? Because people quit paying attention to it for so long. They lost the celebrity, they lost the fame that they had. So that's an issue as well. Another thing that Boethius points out is that fame can't actually stave off the death of the body. You can be as famous as you like, and I suppose you could say, well, they'll freeze you cryogenically, just like they did with Walt Disney. We don't really know that that's alive. We'll wait until they bring him back to life and deal with whatever it is that he had, whatever ailment. And then we'll say that he actually is living on. But if it doesn't happen, he's pretty much dead. And the mortality rate for human beings, as long as we've known about it, is about 100%. So everybody's guaranteed, at least as far as the bodily existence goes, to die sooner or later, and fame can't really do anything about that. So how great of a good can fame truly be? Another thing that he brings up, and this is an interesting one, oftentimes people are famous, and they're not famous because they truly deserve the fame. They're famous because most people are fairly stupid. Especially when you put them together in a mass and you have them vote on American Idol or pick whatever other thing you want. When they do Nielsen ratings or stuff like that. That's what Boethius would say. He says, generally when people are famous, they're not famous because they're great people. They're famous because they happen to be in the right place at the right time. They have a lot of followers, so you click on their social media and, wow, they have a lot of followers, I should probably follow them too. That's how some people actually became celebrities in the last 15 years. Tila Tequila is a great example of that. There are people who are famous just for being famous, where there's a kind of loop involved there. And what does that stem from? That stems from real ignorance. And so if you have fame of that sort, you may enjoy the perks that it gives you, or you may enjoy the feeling of being famous, but it doesn't really provide you with anything truly satisfying, anything that is genuinely the good. So we see that all of these goods of fortune, fame, glory, reputation, power and position, wealth and property, turn out not to really satisfy.